This meeting is being recorded.
Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. My name is Doug Mitchell. I have the great privilege of serving as the Executive Director of the Glacier National Park Conservancy. And this is a really fun night for me because we get to be with the people who make it all happen, right? The Conservancy doesn't do anything without the generous donations of people who love Glacier and are willing to throw in this collective work that we do together to preserve and protect one of America's greatest natural treasures, Glacier National Park. So thank you for an evening talking to some of the folks who are going to be on the ground implementing these projects and or who are leaders in the work we do with Glacier National Park. We're really pleased tonight to have Mark Beal and Tracy Ammerman and Jillian McKenna with us. They're each going to walk you through kind of their work and particularly related to three of the big projects that we have in the project funding needs guide that you see depicted behind me with my friend the pika, who is one of the research projects that we're doing this year. We've called it Eek Eek Yeep. Climate change is really a big thing for pikas. So if you have not gotten your copy of the project guide yet, we can make that happen, doug@glacier.org. We've also, I think, sent you a link to the online version of it as well. I'm joined by the best team in the business, Lacey Kowalski, who's our Associate Director for Programs and Policy, our Director of Development, Stacy Dubuque, Andrew Smith, who's our Communications Lead, Margaret Notley, who is our Vice Chair of the board, other board members as well, Amy Lucky, who is our Events and Donor Engagement Lead as well. So thanks everybody for being here. Mark and Tracy and Jillian, thank you guys for being here. It really is a distinguished group. Mark has been a natural resources program manager at Glacier for a while. You may know him best as Gracie's handler, Alice's husband, and Abby's dad. But he also, has really had a record of great distinction in the park and was the winner of the 2017 NPS Directors Award for Professional Excellence in Natural Resource Stewardship. And Mark is always bringing to us really creative projects in the wildlife space, whether it's for Gracie the Bark Ranger or this year, a really, really important project to kind of think about wildlife disease monitoring and how we're going to get our arms around, again, this mission to preserve and protect Glacier for future generations. So Mark, without further ado, I thought I'd hand it off to you and maybe you can walk us through what you do and what you've got on tap next year.
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for inviting me and having me on here. You said you guys can't do anything without us, but we can't do a lot of these projects without you guys. So thank you very much for having us. As Doug said, I've been in the park for a while now. This October will be 12 years. Time flies. So Natural Resource Program Manager, I'm involved not only in the wildlife aspect, I supervise the other biologists. I do the ungulate work in the park, so anything with hooves on it. And then I'm also involved with the ENI initiative, which is the Blackfeet-led project to bring a free-ranging bison herd back to the landscape. And I do the night sky stuff in the park and a whole host of other duties as assigned. So, but today I just wanted to talk to you about wildlife health monitoring, the proposal that we put in about 5 years ago. Wildlife health monitoring wasn't really that big of a topic, not much of a concern with us, but as climate's changing, it's making the area more conducive to diseases and pathogens that previously wouldn't have been able to survive in Glacier National Park. And we also been pretty sheltered from some of the bigger diseases that are out there. So I came up with this project because in late 2020 we were notified that there was a wild game farm in Flathead County that had tested positive for chronic wasting disease, easy for me to say. And then later in December, we were also notified by the Blackfeet Fish and Game that deer that was harvested on the tribe had tested positive for CWD. And that one was less than 20 miles away from the park border. So as per a 2012 National Park Service chronic wasting disease manager's notebook, which you can all sleep well tonight knowing that one of those exists. It basically states that when, a park is in close proximity, which is, 60 miles or less from confirmed cases where chronic wasting disease has been detected, that we need to up our monitoring game. And so that's one of the wildlife health issues that this project would fund, is opportunistically going around and collecting roadkill cervids. And chronic wasting disease basically affects the white-tailed deer, the mule deer, elk, and moose. So as any of those animals we find dead on the landscape or hit by vehicles, we go out and we opportunistically collect the lymph nodes from them. So unfortunately, chronic wasting disease is not something that you can test for on a live animal. And that's why Lacey and Doug told me I could not have any slides depicting us collecting the sample from the deer. So I spared everybody the blood and gore. But anyways, we need the dead animal. There is no live animal test for chronic wasting disease. But the whole idea behind monitoring for it is to not only know what we have on the landscape, but early detection of chronic wasting disease is one of the best ways to hopefully keep it under control in your population. And since our population of wildlife doesn't know what that black line on the map means, they travel into Canada, they go into the Blackfeet Reservation, they go onto the state lands. Part of this project is also working with the Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks and the Bureau or Blackfeet Indian Reservation to come up with managed chronic wasting disease plans, action plans that tier off of each other so that we all are notifying each other when cases come up. And then depending on where or if we ever get a detection in the park, we'll be able to partner up with either one or both of those groups to implement a plan then that will hopefully keep the outbreak to a minimum. And then some of the other pathogens or diseases that we're hoping to monitor on this that so far we haven't detected in the park. And one of those is the rabbit hemorrhagic disease, which doesn't sound like that big of a deal, but that little critter over Doug's shoulder right there, the pica, is a lagomorph, which is in the rabbit family. And if populations of rabbits are exposed to this rabbit hemorrhagic disease, it's over 90% mortality. So we've been keeping our eye open in the park for dead rabbits or dead pica this year. And so far we have not had any other than one roadkill rabbit, but we know what took that one out. So there was no need to sample that. I think it was someone's Volkswagen. And then the other pathogen that we're interested in monitoring is highly pathogenic avian influenza, and that kills birds. And that has been kind of laying low in the US since about 2014, 2015, when it was a real big issue. And it's just beginning the winter of 2020 and 2021, it was already getting to levels similar to what we saw in 2014 and 2015. So this project would fund staff to respond to incidents that we have where wildlife are found dead and we need to collect samples from them. And then we basically batch up those samples and send them into one big box into the lab, whether it's the Wildlife Diagnostic Lab in Bozeman or the Biological Resources Division of the National Park Service down in Fort Collins. So that's pretty much all I had to say about that. I mean, it's definitely something, again, that wasn't on our radar just 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. But as things are changing, we're finding this stuff moving into the state or into the state adjacent to our states. So, and for chronic wasting disease, it's moving at us from the north, from Canada. It's already identified to the west of us in Libby, and it's slowly moving up from the southeast part of the state in the elk and moose and deer has been detected in those areas. So that's all I got.
Mark, remind me, I'm old, my memory's not that good, but the CWD issue was fairly prominent in Montana maybe a decade and a half ago as related elk, bison, Yellowstone, and cattle. Is my memory close?
Not so much with the bison and cattle, that's brucellosis, but CWD, when the brucellosis issue was kind of blowing up in Yellowstone, CWD was one of the other diseases that was brought in because they were starting to detect it down around Billings and Miles City area. And so that was just another wildlife disease concern that they're trying to get ahead of down there. So, but yeah.
So yeah, that's a great reminder that I was thinking brucellosis, and that was a big deal. So a very different animal, if you will, when we talk about CWD.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about the interface with a knee and the elk study there, and the Buzz Cavell and what they're doing up at the Fish and Wildlife up at the reservation.
Yeah, so we have an elk study that we started this past winter with Blackfeet Indian Reservation, Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, University of Montana, Glacier. And we were able to get, I think, 77 GPS collars out on elk on the reservation lands. And so far, we've had at least a couple dozen of them show up in the park during this spring and summer, and we hope to keep tracking those animals throughout the year because one of the things we want to find out there is movement patterns, and if there's any barriers to movement, when and where the elk calves, so that we can make sure that we have our seasonal closure areas dialed in just right. We don't want to close off too much land at certain times of the year to park visitors, but we do want to make sure we have the core areas identified. One of the neat things about the elk study is it does overlap with the wildlife health study that I just got done talking about, and we were able to collect samples from all 77 of those elk. And there is one way you can do it. It's a rectal biopsy on the elk, so it's not something that we do often, and it's pretty tricky. But those all came back negative for chronic wasting disease, and they were also tested for brucellosis, and they were all negative on that. But the elk study ties in neatly with the ENI initiative, because for almost about 150 years, give or take, the apex herbivore on the landscape, which is the bison, has been missing when it was extirpated. And the elk have kind of filled in that apex herbivore role. So the landscape kind of developed for thousands of years in coordination with the bison, and since they were missing, it's changed a little with the elk on the landscape kind of leading the impacts to it. And so we want to see how that all the grasslands, the birds, the diversity in plant and animal species come back once bison are free to roam on the landscape again. So kind of neat stuff going on.
That's awesome. Neat stuff indeed. Mark Beal, thank you very much. We're going to kind of accumulate questions throughout the three presentations, make sure that we get through the corpus of the presentations, then we'll come back, Kay and others, to some questions. Please feel free to put them in the chat. We're also going to do some giveaways tonight. We've got a Fox shirt, a Glacier Conservancy cup, and a copy of John McLean's outstanding book, Home Waters, which will be our November Glacier Book Club piece. John McLean, of course, Norman McLean's son. So thank you, Mark, and we will no doubt be back to you with some questions. Really always a pleasure to spend some time with Tracy Ammerman. Tracy runs the entire interpretation division. She is the chief of the Division of Interpretation and Education at Glacier Park, and that's a big deal. So when you think about that, and we talk about, ranger-led education and field trips, that's Tracy. When we talk about increasing distance learning, that's Tracy. When we talk about interpretive programs on the trails, that's Tracy. And it really is amazing the breadth of responsibility that she has and the expertise she brings to the park, which she has again, innovated this year in bringing this really important program of the NPS Academy to work on diversity, equity, and inclusion within Glacier National Park and the National Park Service. Tracy Ammerman, tell us a little bit more about where you're going with that.
I would love to. I cannot tell you how excited I am to actually talk about this project. A lot of what you just talked about, the different sort of my purview really is all my staff. I just get to, try to advocate for them. They're the creative ones. They're the ones that do all of the great work. And I'll say this project, I actually did come up with, but it wasn't me, it was me and Lacey. And this goes back to the summer of 2020, the first summer of the pandemic. And literally, I was sitting in my car on the street side in Whitefish. I had to drive around where I could find a tree where I could park in the shade. And we sat and talked, and I was like, hey, Lacey, I have an idea. Do you think the Conservancy might be interested in this project? And she's like, heck yeah, they would be. This is great. So I get to talk to you about the NPS Academy. And again, I'm really excited about this project with all of the work that the Conservancy does to support the park. This is one of those that I think is going to, pay out in the long run and in further and further dues. And I'll share a little bit more of that as I get later in. I did put together some slides for you to help keep me on track because I can go off on tangents. So I'm going to start those up. Let me see, share my screen. Actually, let me back up over here. There we go. There we go. Okay. Is that working, Doug? I see Stacy. Right, great. Perfect. So NPS Academy 2022. The crux of this is to strengthen equity, diversity, and inclusion in the National Park Service overall. This is a park service-wide program, but there are just a few parks in the system that really have the opportunity to take advantage of it, and Glacier National Park is one of those, thanks to the Conservancy. So what is NPS Academy? So it's been around for a while and it's changed names a couple times, but it's a partnership with an organization called American Conservation Experience. They used to be the Student Conservation Association. If anybody had worked with them or had internships or maybe done one yourself, but American Conservation Association. And they're part of the partnership that does the sort of the heavy lifting, the administrative side of it. They do the recruitment for us. They've got connections all across the country. They handle the administrative work, the logistical support, the fun stuff like timesheets and payroll and workers' comp, providing uniforms and the general guidance and administration for the program. It's targeting sort of two key areas for the National Park Service. It's targeting youth and those from backgrounds that have been historically underrepresented in the National Park Service. So basically, youth from diverse backgrounds. And with the idea of that they're innovative and truly immersive summer internships that provide a hands-on introduction to careers in the National Park Service. So it's not just that they're doing an internship, but it's the idea that they're being exposed to a variety of different careers. A lot of people, when they hear about the National Park Service, they think of park rangers. That's what they think of. And they think of like what, Smokey the Bear, Smokey the Bear hat, which another agency, that's not us, but that's what they're thinking of. They're thinking of park rangers, but there's a lot more, as most of you know, to running national parks. So how does NPS Academy work? First of all, you need to be able to pay for it. So thank you. Thank you, donors. Thank you, Conservancy, for helping us to pay for it. So you've got to have funding. And the next phase of it is, once you make sure you've got that funding, is to identify the specific internships. That happens in the early fall into the winter. So we're going to start working on that here shortly. We've got 2 identified for next year, and there's a 3rd one that I'll share a little bit more about. Super important that it is actually genuinely meaningful work. It's intended to be, you know, career development. And so it's really got to be meaningful, engaging, and contributing work. The other, and another piece is, you need to make sure that you find, when you're creating these internships and you're figuring out which direction you want to go, you really need to secure, you know, engaged and dedicated supervisors and mentors. That is a critical component to this program. And thankfully, we were very fortunate in doing that in Glacier. Winter is when ACE actually does the recruitment. They, after we've created a position description working with American Conservation Association, they know specifically the types of internship each park wants. Then they will actually go out and recruit for those specific positions. And those, and then set those candidates up to have interviews with the supervisors and with the different parks. And then those that are selected actually get to go to Grand Teton National Park in the spring. They spend 1 week, the entire cohort for that year will spend 1 week together, learning about National Park Service mission, goals, history, and start to be a little bit introduced to some of the various careers other than the ones that they're specifically interested in. And so a big partnership with Grand Teton National Park, their foundation, and their educational institute to host those interns before they then later go out into their various parks in the summer. The internships average 14 weeks. For our 3 internships, we kind of split it right down the middle. One of the internships was 12, one was 14, one was 16. And they can be longer than that as well. Just how you write your internship and how it works for the program and the candidate that's in that internship. Then in the fall, the last component of it is ACE works with the interns for continued engagement, for alumni engagement, and then also, of course, post-experience surveys. How was the experience? What did they learn? What are they taking forward with them? And then also, if they are interested in being mentors and continuing to be involved in the NPS Academy program. So for Glacier National Park, and our 3 interns highlight the 3 different areas. And our first of the 3 is Maddie Morris. And of course, I will say, you know, I'm going to be a little bit greedy. Of the 3 internships, one of them had to be an interpretation. So we were fortunate to have Maddie, and she was in the West Lakes district of the park. We also intentionally placed all 3 interns on one side of the park. We put them all on the west side, with the hopeful idea that they'd have that cohort. They'd already met at Grand Teton, and they'd have some additional support being at Glacier from the other 2 interns that they'd met at Grand Teton. So for Maddie, part of what she did for us is she did interpretive programming. She developed 7 formal programs, and the quote there, a few by choice, she's a real go-getter. That was her supervisor. She only had to do like 3 or 4 formal programs, but took it on herself to really stretch and grow, and did a few more of those. She also assisted with staffing 2 busy contact stations, the Apgar and Logan Pass Visitor Centers. And then she also roved or did informal interpretation for over 30 hours. And just she alone from roving touched over 1,600 visitors with those contacts, helping them to probably, you know, to trip plan, to have more safe and enjoyable visits, and then of course hopefully to instill some additional learning and excitement about Glacier and their time here. Another quote from her supervisor was that she was a delightful member of the team. So I wanted to share a couple of Maddie's words with you all. Maddie just completed a reflection piece. I was looking for that phrase, a reflection piece for ACE, and it's actually a couple pages. I decided to take just one section of this. And the question was, what was the experience or lesson that most impacted the legacy you hope to have? So what Maddie, and again, this was actually hard to pick from, but this was the one I went with. Maddie says, I hope to have a legacy of putting my all into any sort of situation, especially when it challenges me. This experience showed that for me. I wasn't exactly sure what this experience would be like, as this is a completely new chapter in my life. It was truly and honestly very challenging, but I experienced a lot of growth from that. Another legacy I hope to have, is that someone is a fierce advocate for accessible knowledge. Interpretation is the bridge between people and understanding the world they are visiting. I believe access to nature and knowledge should be for everyone, and I'm happy to be part of that. A big experience that shaped this goal was educating guests about fire and its role in the ecosystem here in Glacier, and changing perspectives on what we view as a problem. So multiple learning there and multiple opportunities for Maddie. Our second intern, oh, I got ahead of myself. Couple pictures. Here's Maddie at the Apgar Amphitheater. One of the programs she did was an evening program at the Apgar Amphitheater. So our setup there along the lake shore. And one of the other programs that she did was our Amazing Animals program. So you can see the variety of pelts that she has there and the interested visitors that are looking at those various pelts. So just a sample of a couple of programs that Maddie did. Okay, now our second intern was Ava Joseph, and Ava worked for the Native Plant Nursery. So a different division. Again, intentionally splitting this up and having the interns have opportunities, not only with different positions, but in different branches. So Ava worked in the Native Plant Nursery, helping with white bark pine restoration, seed scouting and collecting, and plant care in the nursery, weeding, pruning, up-potting, and fertilizing, which I got a big kick out of the word up-potting. That was a totally new vocabulary word for me, and I totally knew what it meant. I just the word, I could picture up-potting. So Ava helped quite a bit in the nursery, and quote from her supervisor was about the internship program itself, and participating in the ACE program was wonderful to be able to provide our intern the exposure to field work in Glacier and one of the many National Park Service careers. So the supervisor's appreciation and experience with the internship. And a few of Ava's words. So Ava just wrote up a quick little summary. And what she shared with us was, arriving in Montana in June, I had no idea what sorts of activities this job entailed and little to no knowledge of Glacier. However, over the course of the last 3 months, I've not only learned more about the wide variety of plants here, but also gained a deeper understanding of what it means to be part of the nursery crew. When I hiked to white bark pine trees, I was taught how verbenone packets are used to repel beetles and how to check for signs of rust on the tree. Going seed scouting and seed collecting gave me the opportunity to improve my plant ID skills, and my coworkers were always there to help me learn and provide useful tips. Taking care of the plants growing in the nursery by weeding, pruning, up-potting, and fertilizing them, I learned how much care and effort is needed to get from a tiny seed to a plant that can be replanted back into the park. I'm incredibly grateful to Dawn, Rebecca, Levi, Carlton, Doug, Annie, Sage, Katie, Shoshona, Andrew, Claire, and Nico for extending to me their knowledge and friendship. I've grown so much over the summer, both professionally and personally, and it would not have been possible without this wonderful team of people. So Ava's experience in the Native Plant Nursery and then out in the field. So great big smile as she's helping to do some seed collecting. I'm kind of thinking they look like they might be huckleberry seeds. I don't know, just saying maybe. setting up camp for her first overnight camping trip. And this is literally her first ever overnight camping trip. And so she is getting ready to spend a night out in the wild in Glacier National Park. And it kind of actually just gave me goosebumps when I said that. Obviously, she's quite excited about that opportunity. And then in the native plant nursery, working with some volunteers and showing her green thumb there with all of the pine seedlings. So super duper
cool.
work. Yeah, super duper work. It is very cool. And then our last volunteer, or intern, I should say, is David Linares. And David worked in the trail crew. So again, different part of the park, different opportunity. And as you might guess, David gained skills in chainsaw and handsaw use, construction of erosion control structures, assisted with maintenance and construction in the trails, or of the trails in the Lake McDonald area. And what I thought was especially fun about this and getting to talk to you all is that he helped with the Conservancy funded accessibility project at the Lake McDonald Wilderness Campsite. So that was just a really super fun connection there, that this intern is also helping with a project that was funded by the Conservancy. And then of course, another tidbit that was shared with me is that David developed a better understanding of how trail maintenance both increases access for visitors and improves resource protection, that dual purpose there. And a comment from David's supervisors that David did a great job and we would love to have him back as an NPS employee next year if he's interested. So if he's interested, it sounds like this internship worked out well for David and he's already got a job lined up if he happens to want it. So it's nice how that works. So again, wanted to say a huge thank you to the donors and GNPC. It is just, we would not have been able to do this without you. So thank you so much for that.
Well, thank you, Tracy and Lacey. I think that, this is a good, and Carl and Candy asked a question about the amount of detail that goes into applications for grants. I'll widen that a little bit about the amount of work that goes into it. That really the cycle for 2024, I'm not misspeaking, 2024 grants is going to get underway here in just a number of weeks. And that's because it's a collaborative project where we share kind of where we are, where we think the path is. The park shares very clearly what their ability is to take on more work, right? Money from us is a double-edged sword in that it really requires the park to have the ability to utilize those resources in an appropriate way. So this really is a true partnership. And the work that goes into that application process is pretty robust. I mean, there's full budgets, there's a real idea of the timeline, of the need. We're adding additional questions to this point in Tracy's leadership. Are we including our Native American neighbors in this? Is there potential in this grant to involve the Blackfeet or the Salish and Kootenai? So we're really have a fairly robust process that's very meaningful in terms of making sure that the park is getting what they need. The park submits all the grant requests to us, and that we are transparent and working with the park collaboratively to figure out the green dots, the moonshots of where we'd like to be in various areas, wilderness, wildlife, wonder, tribal relations, visitor experience over the next 5 years. So Tracy, thank you for that leadership. And it's great to have super experienced leaders who bring a lot of experience to the table. It's also wonderful to see new talent emerge. And our next speaker is that new talent. And Jillian McKenna is fresh off of coming from Washington, D.C., where the director of the National Park Service himself handed her the 2021 NPS Director's Wes Henry Excellence in Wilderness Stewardship Award. Jillian McKenna has been a very important part of the Conservancy family as we have turned that green dot or moonshot in wilderness to really getting all the tools we might need as a park to be the best in breed in terms of what Big W wilderness means in a national park. Jillian McKenna has done the last two projects related to that, one of them as a consultant to the Park Service. And Jillian, thank you for being with us tonight and talking to us about the next iteration of that, which is the Wilderness Program Data Steward Project.
Yeah, thanks, Doug, for having me. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here and tell you guys about this new project. So I'm going to share my screen as well. I have some slides, mostly just for the pretty pictures.
And remember to keep pumping good questions into the chat. We've got a few and we'll have plenty of time for questions.
All right, can everybody see that? Cool, thank you. All right, I'm sorry, I need to stop my video while I do this. My internet has already crashed once and I want to make sure it goes smoothly. So just so that way you can see things, I'll pop it back on when I'm done. But yeah, I'm here to tell you about this new project we're doing, the Wilderness Program Data Steward. All right. And so this project is all about bringing Glacier's wilderness program into the 21st century. And that's from a data collection and management perspective. And then we're also wanting to improve our wilderness monitoring in general. And so we're doing this by creating a new system for collecting and storing data within the program. And then we're improving and increasing the amount of wilderness data collection. We're transitioning the wilderness rangers from collecting data with pencil and paper to using mobile forms. And then we're also hoping to create opportunities for internships to support our wilderness data collection. And so a little bit more about the mobile data collection for the wilderness rangers. You can see one of our wilderness rangers here. That's Laura, one of the Belly River Rangers. So we got phones this year for each of the wilderness and river rangers to do their data collection in the field. You can see her holding it out there. And so we use two main apps on those phones, Survey 123 and Field Maps. And Survey 123 is an app that has these smart forms that can be filled out right on the phones. It includes location data. And I've made specifically ones for the wilderness rangers, like their patrol reports that are right on the phones, but then they can also use them to access park-wide surveys to report things like bear and other wildlife sightings. And then Field Maps is a mapping app that I've set up for them so they can map things like invasive weeds and then installations and developments, things like that when they're out in the field. And again, it's all right from that phone. And both apps can include photos, which they can take directly from the phones. And then when they get back into the office, they submit their surveys and maps, and it all gets stored online and is available for our whole wilderness group to see. And so it makes it a lot easier for the wilderness coordinator who's in West Glacier to use any of the data that they're reporting on, even though they're spread out throughout the park. And it also gives the rangers access to their government email and other government resources, as well as apps like Microsoft Word and Excel right on the phones. And in a world where, as you all know, office space and computer availability can be very limited, this has really been a big help for communication for all of them. And then it also just kind of removes this whole need to use personal phones for work, which is something we've really wanted to focus on. They were always using their personal phones to take pictures, document things, but now they can do all that, map everything. They can even hook their phones up to their inReaches to communicate with our dispatch when they're out in the field. And if they need to cross the Canadian border to get into Goat Hunt for any work, they can do that app right from these devices as well. So to kind of show you what it would look like, this is an example of the Field Maps app. On the right is what it looks like on the phone. So if you're out pulling weeds, this would be at Trout Lake. You would scroll through those options at the bottom there until you found the weeds treatment layer that you wanted to draw in. And then you would start mapping. So you can draw a point, a line. You could even walk around in a little circle and draw a polygon. And then once you sync that map back in the office, we can go on the computer and I can make this map on the left here super easily. So these are some of the points that one of our wilderness rangers, he hand pulled a few different species of invasive hawkweed this summer at Trout and Arrow Lakes. It was super easy for me to just pull up his data, and I had this map within a couple of minutes, which was really awesome to be able to show our wilderness coordinator what folks are doing out in the field. And then this is kind of what survey 123 looks like. So on the left, these are the different surveys that the rangers have available to them right now. I've made a few of them, but then again, some of them are park-wide. And then we can automatically start looking at the results on the Survey 123 website once they submit their reports. So I pulled up a couple highlights for this season that I thought would be fun to share. So our wilderness rangers have completed 57 projects, patrolled over 1,600 miles, encountered over 1,700 visitor parties. So not individuals, but parties. So that could be, you know, sometimes on Avalanche, that could be 15 in a party. And then they've removed 189 trees using hand saws as opposed to chainsaws. And we look at a lot more than just that, but I thought those would be some fun ones to look at. And then in addition to the mobile data collection, this project also involves adding some additional monitoring and then doing some other data compilation. So we started this summer monitoring water quality near a few wilderness toilets to make sure, you know, we're not seeing any issues there. And then we're hoping to start some wilderness specific soundscape monitoring next summer, hopefully bring on an intern to maybe help with that. And then this winter, we're actually going to have a volunteer who's going to help us dive into some historic data and compile from what's already out there. We're going to see what we can find. So looking at things like old aviation reporting, there's some potential data of wildlife reporting along the wild and scenic river corridors. And then looking through all the old wilderness ranger reports to see if there's anything we can find out of those. And then we've also been involved with the University of Montana Trail Monitoring Program with this project. We're going to continue working with them and hopefully getting toward the point where we can add some of our own trail monitoring that we can have consistent so we can include it in our wilderness character monitoring plan. And then we'd like to find some better ways to monitor visitor encounters as well as solitude. That's a big one for wilderness that we'd like to figure out how we can best monitor that. And so these are just a few of the ones that we've talked about that we'd really like to add to the program. And then to kind of talk a little bit more about why this project's important. And the main reason is that it's going to help us protect and improve wilderness character here at Glacier. So as a lot of you probably know, Glacier's wilderness was recommended for designation back in 1974. And even though it was never designated, we're still mandated by NPS policy to protect it as such and to not let wilderness character degrade. So this project builds off of our wilderness character monitoring plan and then that wilderness character mapping project, which was my project last summer that Doug mentioned. And the result of that you can see on the right there. So that dark green is those areas of most optimal wilderness character going to the dark purple where it's most degraded, and then that pink and yellow is kind of in between. And so the monitoring plan and mapping project showed us where we're seeing cumulative impacts to wilderness character, and it's given us ideas on where we can improve. And so now this project not only continues collecting data for the monitoring plan, but then it's also adding new monitoring protocols so that we can have more baselines to compare to in the future. So we can add more things to look at and look for trends in. And then we can also use this data that we're collecting with this project to better inform management actions and decisions. So by collecting this data, we can provide our leadership team with the actual numbers to determine what's going on, and then we can brainstorm on how we can improve. And then this project also is really increasing efficiency for our program. Like I said, the rangers were filling out forms on pencil and paper when they were in the field. They'd come back and type them up and store them in these folders that people really looked at because they were kind of hard to go through. There wasn't a good way to like search for anything. They weren't queryable. And so it was a lot of work, repetitive work that wasn't really going anywhere. But now these forms are only going to be filled out once right on those phones. They'll immediately go into an easily accessible and queryable database. It's really easy to send reports out from it. And then their data is actually going to be able to be used. So it should really help with that. And then it's also important, and this goes back to what Tracy was presenting on, but it gives opportunities for young people in the workforce to learn about and gain experience in wilderness stewardship. And we always need more wilderness stewards in the Park Service, and this is a really great opportunity to create them. So I am working on this project as a Pathways student trainee. So while I am in uniform now, no longer a contractor, I am still an intern. So it's really been an incredible opportunity for me to gain experience in the field, and I truly do learn something new every day that I'm here. And this winter, like I said, we're hoping to bring on a volunteer to help with some of the archival research I mentioned. And then we've been writing up proposals and projects for various internship positions to help with the monitoring, like the soundscape that I mentioned. And as someone who did start in the Park Service as an intern, and I'm still an intern here, I really know firsthand how important these opportunities can be for getting your foot in the door and jump-starting your career. It can be really hard to break into it, and internships are a really great way to do that and just allow you to learn so much more, I think, when you're in the positions. So thank you to all of you. This project really truly wouldn't be possible without the donations of you guys and the help of the Conservancy. So I really, really appreciate it. And yeah, I'm here to answer any questions you may have about this project, wilderness, anything like that. So thank you guys.
Wow, you know, you can see why I love this job, why all of us who work at the Conservancy love this job. We get to work with these people every day, and having been a federal employee, you know, public service is, as Max Baucus used to say, the most noble human endeavor, and I believe that. And tonight we've seen 3 dedicated public servants who bring the best their A game to work for you and me and the park and the place we love every day. And I just couldn't be more honored to do this work. And it's why we take so very seriously our responsibility as stewards of the money you so generously provide to make sure we can get every nickel of it that we can to the park. So so thank you for that. And again, I can't do, like Tracy, I can't do any of this alone. And particularly Lacey Kowalski in this field of grants, you know, has been reinventing and improving this grant stuff. And Lacey, thank you for your leadership as well. You've also been monitoring the chat room, and I know there's some questions in there. So while Andrew picks out today's winners, I'll hand it over to you to ask some questions.
Yeah, we've got some good questions, and feel free to keep them coming too if you think of anything. I'm going to throw it back to Mark. Kay had a great question. She was curious if we are cooperating with Canadian parks or game authorities.
Yeah, so we're wrapping in Parks Canada into the wildlife health and the elk study and the Indian initiative kind of late in the game, because for a few years there they had staff turnover and a lot of vacancies, at least in the wildlife branch. And so now they're starting to fill those positions, and now that they have staff in them, we're bringing them in, and they're more than happy to work with us to the extent that we can with the international border right there. And yeah, so we're going to be entering into a data sharing agreement with the elk study, and then they're going to be starting to collect some of the samples also on their lands that they're responsible for managing, also for the wildlife health. So
Awesome.
We're there.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. And let's see, Margaret had a question for Tracy. She was curious how long the ACE program has been in operation elsewhere, and if you have any information on success rates of alumni pursuing NPS careers.
They're awesome questions. Thank you, Margaret. I appreciate you asking those questions. The ACE program has, I don't know the actual number of years, but I'm going to look that up, and I'm also gonna, I know that they have a sense of the success rate. I'm gonna circle back with Deidre Goodwin from ACE and ask her those questions, because I don't know the exact answer. That's like the long yammer to say I don't actually know. But I do know that we have had NPS Academy interns in the park years back. Mark Wagner, who some of you might know, was our Hudson Bay District interpreter for a many number of years. And unbeknownst to me, even though I was his supervisor, he was using some of his intern funding to bring some NPS Academy students to the east side of the park. And I actually learned that while I was working with NPS Academy. So he was sneaking around doing good work and I didn't even know it. But I will circle back and get those answers for you, Margaret. Thanks for asking.
Thank you, Tracy. One other question regarding the interns. Margaret was curious if they were generally local or not. So I'd love it if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Sure. The interns that we had this year, this is our first formal year in my knowledge that we've been doing this. So, and working with the Conservancy to do this. The 3 interns that we had this year were not local. They were recruited from other areas. What I can envision though is working with ACE to see if they can target more local areas, which they certainly will. They are very flexible, and they so that's something that we can work with them and see if they can target some of the local communities and our tribal neighbors.
I think that NPS Academy is a really good mixture because a lot of the other internships that we fund are aimed at local students just because of the housing crunch. So I really love how NPS Academy has brought these 3 interns from around the country personally.
And I think
Can
that,
I
you know, I
add
think
one
that's
piece to that? Oh,
go ahead,
sorry.
Tracy. No, go.
I was just going to build off of that because we do have the housing crunch that we're all aware of. And one of the things that I was really happy about is selling this to the parks leadership team and having the park leadership team commit to providing housing for those 3 interns. That's a big deal for our leadership team to take 3 housing spots for internships. And so I was really proud of our leadership team to like right off the bat say, yeah, we support this project too. So just a really good partnership all around.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, this is an issue that is hugely important and challenging to all of us in a number of ways, and particularly just in a state, right, that's 90% plus white. And to think about diversity in a more robust way, I think is important. And we had a guest on a book club earlier this year, Carolyn Finney, who wrote this book, Black Faces, White Spaces, that there just are some underlying structural issues related to the way various people feel comfortable in our national park system that going to take us a bit of time to unwind. So thank you for the leadership here. I think it's really critical. So it's really great.
Yeah, and I'm not picking on you, Tracy, but Lana has a great question that's kind of a follow-up to what we were just talking about. She said, you mentioned that the program was aimed at DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And she was curious, how successful is the program in increasing minority interns? So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. That might be something that you circle back with when you get more statistics, but.
Yeah, well, I think a quick answer to that, Lana, is that the recruitment is specifically to recruit diverse interns. Those interns self-identify. So some may look more diverse than others, but they self-identify as to what their background is. And the full intention is for all of those internships through the NPS Academy is for them to be diverse candidates. So ideally, it's 100% of those internships.
Okay, let's see. Mike has a good question for Mark and Jillian. He said, obviously, the great increase in visitation over the past few years adversely affects wildlife health and degraded zones. It seems like Logging Lake and Quartz Lake were degraded in your presentation, Jillian. Any ideas about how to educate new visitors as they enter the park to be more aware of the delicate nature of these issues?
I can speak a little from the wilderness side. I would say right now, we have not talked about that mostly because we're still we kind of just finished the gathering the data stage and are now kind of figuring out what's the next step. And so that's kind of a good thing to add to the list of things. And I want to clarify with the degraded zones and the being logging in quartz, just because I didn't give that full presentation right now. It's all relative within the park. So it doesn't mean that it's like bad. It's just compared to some other areas, there's some cumulative impacts. So I don't want you guys to think that like quartz and logging are these terrible degraded places. That's definitely not not what it actually means. But yeah, Mark, I don't know if there's anything from the wildlife side that you guys worked on.
Yeah, I think for any of these topics, whether it's wildlife health or the degraded zones or, how to properly camp and, I don't think there's a one size fits all way to educate the visitors. There's the printed, and that hits a certain demographic, and then there's the online. We try and use social media as much as we can. We have the park newspaper, we have the radio channel. I think that's, again, regardless of the topic, I think that's probably the one of the bigger challenges we have in getting our message out is how do we do it efficiently and effectively and touch on as many people as we can. And that's, luckily I just deal with, people and things that can eat people, and Tracy deals with this issue. So, but it's a challenge. How do we do that best to reach the biggest crowd with the least amount of effort? And so I would say we use all of them, and hope for the best.
Yeah, and Mike,
Another
it's an
thing-
area, interestingly, again, where our partnership comes in handy. I had breakfast with the superintendent a week ago Monday, and the Leave No Trace movement is getting some traction, and obviously one of the things that this park and other parks are seeing much more human waste, and so the idea of educating people about being able to take I call them bio bags. I don't know what the right term is about a waste bag. But of course they have to get them somewhere, right? And so since we run this bookstores in the visitor centers, we have to be ready if they're going to say take one, that they ought to be able to get one, right? Kind of like a bear spray. So we were able easily to turn on the switch and say, yes, we have a vendor. We'd be prepared to do that even as early as this year, if that's something that's important. So it's again neat partnership to be able to say, hey, if we educate about bear spray, can you guys have bear spray, right? Yeah, it's kind of neat. Andrew, I think you might have some winners for us.
I do got a few winners. So our first winner of this beautiful Clean Canteen Conservancy logo mug is Joe Spitz. So Joe will be sending this mug your way. Great way to start off your day with some coffee. Our book winner of the November book club book, Home Waters. I think everyone's going to want to grab a copy of this book. It's going to be a really amazing book club. But winner for that one was Thomas Fisher. And then we have our Fox shirt, and the winner of that one was Lois Black. So you'll be expecting a Fox shirt in the mail, and maybe we can get Bill one too, so you guys can match.
Awesome. Well, that's great. And I think, Lacey, we got through most of the questions. You have any new ones that popped in there?
We have, let's see, no new ones. There is one from Greg that I did not get to.
Oh, good. Let's get to it.
Yeah, and I know I feel bad that we're leaving this for the end when this could be a very robust conversation, but Greg was curious for Jillian, what are the next steps to achieving true wilderness designation for Glacier? And do you have thoughts on the pros and cons of that?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It can be a doozy, but it's a fun one. As far as next steps go, I think as far as where we're at with the park, we're kind of up to where we can be. So we sent our recommendation, Congress, the president, Richard Nixon, sent it forward originally, right? And then Congress just kind of didn't do anything with it. And they didn't say no. But so right now, I think there is an act sitting somewhere in Congress right now, the Northern Rockies Ecosystem Act, and wilderness designation for Glacier is in there. But it's kind of one of those things that seems to just keep getting hung up in there. And so it's kind of, from our standpoint, up to the public and the citizens to push for that to happen. As far as pros and cons, the pros, it is, designation is the highest form of land preservation for federal land in the United States. Policy, how we're managed right now, is not nearly as strong. So with administration changes, things can change pretty easily. So the higher ups in Washington could decide that, I don't know, they want to develop a new road in the park or something like that in our wilderness. It's not nearly as strong as an actual congressional designation, which would prevent that. But the main thing is there really aren't any cons. Nothing's going to change necessarily. It's just kind of that added protection, but day to day, nothing's going to change. So a lot of times people think, you know, since we're designated no more chainsaws, because some other wilderness areas don't use them. In reality, it's always the minimum necessary is what you can use. So every day here, we still go through what's the minimum necessary to do the job. None of that's going to change. It's just going to protect us from kind of those bigger things. So lots of pros. I haven't seen any cons. So, but yeah, it's kind of out of the park's hands at this point from what I'm aware of, at least.
Jillian, Mark, Tracy, thank you very much for all you do and for your evening tonight, spending one of your few precious summer evenings with us tonight. The sun's about to go down in Glacier. It's going to be a beautiful sunset, and the sun never goes down here at the Glacier Conservancy as we're on the path to, again, a record for the first time ever, supporting $3 million in projects for 2023, 3.4 million to be precise. None of which would be possible without any of you. So thank you very much. Thank you for your time, talent, and treasure. And we'll look forward to seeing you at a Glacier Book Club, Glacier Conversation, or even better, in person real soon. Thanks again and good night.